Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Welcome everyone to another week on the Damage Report. John Idarola. It of course is Monday, so Brooke is in studio.
Yes, I'm here. I'm glad to be here. Yes, thank you.
Not only are you here today, but also a little bit later on this week, we're gonna be filming a special year-end review of all the damage that's happened across the country. And you're gonna be co-hosting that with me.
Yeah, and wait, today, does Postmates come on today? Is that today? Is it this?
We're gonna check on that.
I thought it was the 17th.
That sounds right. It does, okay.
That's a possibility of like a triple, like.
So much, Brooke.
Brooke and John,
too much.
like pair up.
Yes.
And I mean, too much. I feel like that's up for discussion.
But that's really exciting. So Postmates is a special game show event that we filmed for members, and it features basically all of the TYT hosts paired up doing a couples game sort of thing. And you and I had to test our knowledge of each other. But it was a lot of fun. It was so much fun. And you can watch that if you're a member. But you might be thinking, wait, I'm stupidly not a member yet.
Right, and so what you need to do to become a member is go to tyt.com/Brooke. Thanks for like that setup there. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, I mean, as long as you stay ahead of Brett, I'm fine with it. Okay, so we're gonna be moving on to the news. There's so much to talk about today. Not only do we have some staffing changes in the White House and in the cabinet.
Every day.
We also have, yes. Donald Trump has been the target of a lot of legal action, but it turns out that now he might be flipping the tables and he's identified someone he wants to go after. Who is he possibly gonna be suing? We'll break that down later on the show. We're gonna close out the hour actually with updated stats on Donald Trump's war on the working class, how his trade war is actually negatively impacting American income and employment. And along the way, we've got two awesome guests. Joining us in just a little bit in studio, podcaster and author Chris Ryan is gonna be joining us to talk about his awards show, which gives awards to those who have done the most damage to the environment. So no awards show in the country more perfectly appropriate to profile here on the Damage Report. Although we'll probably end up talking about the Golden Globes and stuff because I like that. Anyway, later on, we're gonna have Jane Coaston's gonna come back on the show. She's got a write-up on YouTube's conspiracy theory problem, including the most bonkers conspiracy theory in American politics. She's gonna be breaking down what that is a little bit later on. But first, let's turn to the White House. It was announced not long ago that Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is going to be moseying back on down that dusty trail. He's done what he came to do, sell off American lands to people who are gonna exploit it for coal and oil and fracking and uranium development and things like that. And along the way, he has, as that lower bar is alluding to, he's been the focus of a lot of different ethics and criminal potential violations. But first, the announcement, Donald Trump saying Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke will be leaving the administration at the end of the year after having served for a period of almost 2 years. Anytime someone has been around that long, he is going to point it out because so few do.
Right.
Ryan has accomplished much during his tenure and I want to thank him for his service to our nation, or in tearing apart our nation, selling it off to the highest bidder. So you should know as he is leaving, because he's unlikely to simply go away forever. He'll either be on Fox News or he'll end up running for Congress or something. He was investigated for at least 15 different ethics violations, a Montana development deal rife with conflicts of interest, improper politicking, I should say, on behalf of Republican candidates, huge cost outlays for his office and others. One example of that last thing, he spent over $12,000 on a charter flight to see a hockey team owned by a donor. So very appropriate for an Interior Secretary. He blocked 2 Native American tribes in Connecticut from opening a casino after lobbying from Nevada Republicans. That's amazing. And allegations of retaliation against an agency policy expert who reported on the impacts of climate change on Native Alaskans. Although in Zinke's defense in that case, that has pretty much been the approach towards climate scientists across the US government over the past couple of years. So he was sort of just doing his job there. Are you sad to see him go?
No, I mean, this is so normal when you hire these people who are full of scandalous past, they continue that behavior. Especially then on top of that, you hire people who aren't super qualified for the job. A lot of the times that's because they have a lot of scandalous investigations and a terrible history. continue to do that.
Yeah, the interesting thing with a lot of these people that have been brought into the candidate is the cabinet, I should say, is generally it appears that they have been chosen to directly subvert the mission of the department that they're going to run.
Yes,
so
right.
If you're supposed to manage our public lands, be a good steward for them, instead just sell them off. Just chop them up into bits and then sell them off to whoever will give you the most money. So that's what he's doing. But often they go above and beyond even that, where they have these bizarre personal issues as well. So one of the scandals was he reportedly threatened Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski after she voted against a Republican effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. So not after the Alaska senator stopped oil development in Alaska or something specific to either Alaska or to his department, but he was just operating as a crazed ideologue while he was serving in the cabinet. Affordable Care Act has nothing to do with his purview over land development and things like that. But he did it anyway, and as well as those ethical issues, there's what he was able to do as secretary. So let's focus on that. Some of the big ones. The Bears Ears National Monument is gonna be shrunk 85%. We talked about that multiple times. Grand Staircase Escalante being cut in half from around 1.9 million acres to about 1 million. Now, those gigantic cuts to these national monuments means that huge percentages of land that was set aside for a number of different reasons. Either it has traditional or historical relevance, it has sort of Native American sacred lands in some cases, protected from development, maybe for endangered species, things like that. Now it's going to be sold off. And he really worked overtime in that. Apparently, he offered so much land in auctions that a lot didn't end up even having any bidders because there was simply too much for the corporations that were able to extract things to actually extract from all of this land. And he kept putting pressure on field offices to make it to free up land to be auctioned off, even though a lot of it wasn't being bid on. Or I would assume in even more cases, if it was being bid on, probably the price was not very high if there was very little competition.
So I guess like 3 reasons why this should be alarming for people, right? Like 1, he's drastically reducing land that should be preserved. 2, there's just happens to be a coincidence that some form of the fossil fuel industry likes this land. And then also they keep the plan such a secret.
Yeah.
You don't get any real information about why this is happening.
Yeah.
This is bizarre.
Yeah, well, yeah, bizarre. I mean, I would say historically, it certainly fits into the pattern from the White House. But as you allude to, there was a lot of secrecy, of course. He gets in there to give oil and coal and gas developers and stuff like that what they want, but he doesn't want you to know that he's doing that. So one of the techniques that they used was when he would have meetings with lobbyists, he would bring someone else along, then log it as a meeting with that person, even though he was really there in the room meeting with the lobbyists. So for instance, on May 16th back last year, he met with Representative Chris Collins. I believe it's the same representative who went down for insider trading. Just they're crossing their corruption in different areas. But his calendar doesn't show that there were other people in the room. 3 representatives from a company that does business with the National Park Service. The meeting is one of about a dozen instances uncovered by CNN of his calendar omitting or obscuring important details, leaving the public in the dark about who is meeting with Zinke, one of his most trusted cabinet officials. And he should be one of his most trusted cabinet officials. While there are all of these investigations and ethics worries and things like that, they didn't tend to generate the sort of news attention that, say, Scott Pruitt, the former head of the EPA's did, or in the case sometimes with Ben Carson and others. They were more low level, they're about land management. Like, that's not sexy, people don't really care about that. And along the way, he accomplished his goal of selling off a bunch of land that now is gonna be exploited. So even if hypothetically a future Democratic president were to redesignate it as protected lands, if you had some sort of historic site there, that's been blasted away.
Right.
The mountains, they're clearing mountaintops and all that stuff. This is permanent damage that's being done to these preserves.
Right, and just the 2 people that you just mentioned, like all of this behavior is so similar. All this scandalous behavior by these people who've been appointed to these positions that they probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, and the disappointing thing is he's going to be replaced, of course, and I would be willing to bet a large amount of money that it's going to be another shill for the oil and gas industry and things like that. Unfortunately, the Republicans still maintain control of the Senate to whatever extent there would be any control exercised over a new appointment. We're not going to have it.
These terrible people.
Well, I mean, in this particular case, of course they don't. Like the Republican senators, they want another Ryan Zinke. They're not worried about that at all. It would be great if the Democrats had more influence over what goes on in the Senate. Unfortunately, their power is limited to the House, if they're even in time anyway. So it is likely that whoever.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Whoever replaces him is going to be another flavor of the same sort of thing. That's what I would predict. With that said, we are going to take our first break. When we come back, a new environmental awards show focusing not on those who have protected the environment, but those who are doing the damage that we're profiling in segments like this. Next week, we're going to be doing a review of different areas of damage being done to this country when it comes to gun control, immigration, and the environment. But it turns out there's actually been a great profile of some of the worst damage done to our country in environmental terms earlier this month in California, actually. And I'm very glad to be joined today by the person who was profiling some of that damage. This is Chris Ryan, author and podcaster. Very excited to have you in studio.
Thank you.
So you have an awards show.
Yeah.
Which tries to shed light in an area where the media doesn't tend to focus all that often. Can you tell us about that?
Well, my buddy Kyle Tierman and I were hiking. He's a big wave surfer and environmentalist, and we were hiking one day and we were talking about how hard it is to focus on the environment and the news coming out of that area because it's so depressing. Mm-hmm. And we're thinking, like, how could we package it in a way where there's some humor and some sexiness and make it more appealing? Mm-hmm. And we came up with this idea of totally flipping it and actually congratulating the companies that are doing the best job of destroying Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. And
which you don't normally see, of course.
Which you don't normally see, right? So the idea, the conceit of the award show is that, you know, Mother Earth is losing and everyone wants to be on the winning side. So let's join those companies and celebrate their achievements in making Mother Earth scream the loudest in the past year. So the award show is called the Mother Effer Awards, I think we're allowed to say.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, I brought you this cup.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is a little bit of swag we had. So at the ceremony, there was no plastic. There was a water station.
I was just
like you
thinking
guys have
that.
here, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very cool. So we passed these reusable wine tumblers out, and people got water bottles. Clean Canteen made up some water bottles for us, and
that's awesome.
So anyway, you know, Kyle's 28, and he was like, "Dude, we should do this," and I was like, I'm 56, you do it. You know, like I'll call some friends. So we came up with the idea of having comedians accept the awards on behalf of the winning corporations. And
you had some high profile comedians.
Sure, yeah. Jake Johansson, Brendan Walsh, Moshe Kasher and Natasha Leggero did an incredible bit. And so what we did was we lined up the comedians, but we didn't tell them what to say. We just gave them some information about the winning corporation, and they put together their own bits, like 4 to 5 minute a bit that they did in character.
Yeah.
And they were very proud, and so we sold out the theater, 350 seat theater in Inglewood, the Miracle Theater, and it was a rousing success.
And so I wanted to ask you about some of the winners, because you had award categories separated into different elements, correct?
Right. Yeah. There were. Let's see if I can remember them. There was air, fire, land, water, spirit, and reality.
And reality. That's interesting. So who were some of the standout winners?
Well, let's see. The reality category was Facebook, because they've done the most to undermine our collective sense of reality. And of course, their meddling in the election was fantastic, really well done. And another winner was Chase Bank for their financing of tar sands, which is the dirtiest form of energy, as you know. Coca-Cola.
I did not know that Chase was a big investor in that, actually.
They're the biggest, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Both in the US and also, I would imagine, Canada.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who else? Let's see. Coca-Cola was a big winner for being the #1 dumper of plastics into the world's oceans.
Yeah.
Pepsi was a close second, as always, but Coca-Cola pulled it out.
Yeah. That's one of the big ones this year that I've definitely been noticing more. We had early on this year, we had a representative from National Geographic on, and they're doing this, I think, a 2-year-long focus on plastic pollution. And ever since that interview now, as I go around, I just realize how much we use it and don't even think about the amount of plastic that we're throwing away.
Yeah, and in Asia is much, much worse. Most, I think, 8 of the top 10 sources of plastic pollution are coming out of Asia. Yeah, PG&E was a surprise winner for starting 24 of the last 27 wildfires in California.
Oh, I did notice that one.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a bit of a silver lining in that the media was forced to pay attention to the severity of not only the most recent, so the Camp Fire and all that, but all this year California has been on fire.
Yeah.
And finally, I think people are starting to catch on a little bit that this is not just, hey, it's always been this way, we've burned forever, but that things are actually getting worse.
A lot of that is because of lack of maintenance to the power lines.
Yeah. So I'm curious. At the same time that we've had horrendous extreme weather events, both in terms of fire and hurricanes and mudslides and all of that, we also now, at least in the past month or so, have had a level of attention on the possibility of a Green New Deal or something like that generally isn't talked about in DC. Does that and the sort of fallout from the election, does that give you any hope that maybe future editions of the Mother Effer Awards will have less to hand out? That we might start to address some of these issues? Well,
I don't think we're going to run out of winners, but there is another category that we are paying attention to, which I'm sure I can't say this, the C blockers, can we say? So we've got the Mother Effers and the C blockers who are doing good work. So for example, Ron Finley, the gangster gardener, I don't know if you've had him on the show.
No.
He's a guy I met actually when I gave my TED Talk 5 or 6 years ago. He has a great TED Talk about taking vacant lots in city centers in Inglewood and South Central and showing kids how to grow food there and then have it be available to the community. So he was one of the presenters. We had Captain Paul Watson, who's the founder of Sea Shepherd and one of the early Greenpeace activists as a presenter. So we're not gonna run out of winners, but we hope in future iterations to call attention to people who are doing good work, trying to either stop this damage or repair it or sort of redirect the economy perhaps in a way that isn't self-destructive.
Well, it would be awesome if there were elected officials that deserve that sort of recognition. Is there anyone
that amazing?
Yeah, is there anyone that stands out as a consistent ally on environmental issues that you think is deserving of credit?
You and I were talking before we went on air. I met Bernie Sanders in 1982, probably, when he was mayor of Burlington. He came and gave a talk at the college I went to. And I think he's been incredibly consistent in his good sense. I'm not super familiar with his environmental policies, but my friend Josh Fox was an advisor to his campaign. Josh directed
Gasland.
Gasland, exactly, yeah. So anyone Josh aligns himself with is pretty good on the environment.
Yeah.
So I think Bernie's great, and it's just hard in the current moment to think of anybody in national politics. I'm sure Ocasio-Cortez is good, but until there's a fundamental shift in American politics, I don't think I'm not looking to political leaders for hope in this area.
Yeah, and it would be amazing if there was a shift that made it so that there was a significant chunk of Americans who are actually voting based on these issues. That they weren't just voting for good candidates who happen to be environmentalists, but actually looking for environmentalists when they're choosing in primaries and things like that.
Yeah, if you're going to be a single issue voter, the environment has to be your issue. I mean, what else is there? It's everywhere, it's everything, and until we get this worked out, nothing else really matters.
And I wanted to give your awards show credit for something that I think that I'm seeing a little bit more this year, in that in talk for decades now, environmentalists have, I think, rightly tried to get as much progress as possible in advising people, and here are things that you can do to reduce your carbon footprint or use less plastic or things like that. And I think a lot of Americans see environmental issues and dealing with climate change through that lens, that what can the individual do? But I'm glad that there are awards shows like yours that are saying, yeah, we can do what we can, but these corporations are way, way bigger than us. That we might need to start to see this less through a purely individual lens and more through a systemic and corporate lens.
Right.
That reforming them, regulating them is going to be hundreds of thousands, millions of times more effective than merely what we can do as individuals. And I think that focusing on the corporations, including people who are funding these sorts of developments and stuff like that, is very important.
Right, and also we're trying to leverage social media to do some brand damage. So we have a hashtag MoFa's18. So people are posting online. Everybody is like they're taking selfies of themselves, giving the finger. That's to the company. So if you're at Chase Bank, take a thing, hashtag MoFa's18. We're trying to, as you well know, one of the most effective political tools is ridicule and brand damage. And so if we can leverage social media and people's sense of activism and anger that underlies this humor into actually doing some damage, maybe they'll make some changes just to avoid future social media attacks.
Exactly.
And if they sue us, then they sue us, and that'll just help our cause.
Yeah, I saw a quote by you where you said it was something like it was a great honor to finally be sued by a multinational corporation.
Well, we're hoping, yeah. And in the pamphlet that we put out, it says all lawsuits should be directed toward Christopher Ryan and Kyle Tierman, co-creators. Well, the Yes Men we're on as well. Do you know the Yes Men? Do you know their work?
The podcast?
No, they're sort of media terrorists. They go on, like one guy was on the BBC World Live claiming that they were going to spend $40 billion cleaning up their toxic waste site in India, which was totally not true.
Anyway, I'm not familiar with that.
Look them up. The Yes Men are fantastic.
Well, look, fantastic as well. The Mother Effer Awards. Thank you for doing that and causing people to sort of take a second look at some of these corporations that have really been given a pass by the media.
I should also say the Nell Newman Foundation funded the first award show.
Oh, really?
We couldn't have done it without them.
Awesome.
So.
Well, thank you so much for your work and for coming on the show.
Sure.
Great to have you on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more with Brooke when she returns. So we're gonna jump back into it. Brooke back on set. Great to have you here.
Thank you, I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here for this topic in particular, so let's jump into it. SNL did their last show of the year, and as they do, they talked a little bit about Donald Trump, and they had a segment where Donald Trump was like given a vision of what his life would be like and all of the people in his orbit would be like if he had not become president. So you're seeing there, so he's not under investigation, obviously. Kellyanne Conway is still on speaking terms with her husband. Eric Trump is learning a little bit of Spanish, and Melania has gotten rid of her accent as well. Michael Cohen's very happy too, you see there. So all of them, it's just little jokes about how their lives might be improved if they weren't headed to jail. And Donald Trump didn't like that. And so he responded, and he's going, I think, a little bit over the top. So he tweeted, a real scandal is the one-sided coverage hour by hour of networks like NBC and Democrat spin machines like Saturday Night Live. It is all nothing less than unfair news coverage and Dem commercials. Should be tested in courts. Can't be legal. Only defame and belittle. Collusion? So we found the collusion after 2 years.
It's a sketch comedy show.
It's a sketch comedy show. Now, let's just be clear. If you're not familiar with SNL, it is comedy. It's not news. So now you know that and we know that. I believe that Donald Trump knows that, but I'm not 100% sure.
Right, and it's run by a man named Lorne, not Lauren, Kanye West, but that's a whole other conversation that we don't have time for today.
Yeah, so to accuse them of collusion or to say that theoretically that you should go to a court is, I would say, pretty crazy. It is not often that a joke against you wrecks you so badly that you whine for a judge to protect you in the future. Right. But he's doing that, and look, it's not like he's the first politician to get butthurt over some jokes being thrown his way. But 30 years ago, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that satire is protected under the First Amendment. In Hustler magazine Incorporated versus Falwell, fundamentalist minister Jerry Falwell sued Hustler for emotional distress after the publication ran a parody ad on its cover, joking that he had had an incestuous encounter with his mother in an outhouse. Which, look, to be fair, that's rough. But the Supreme Court determined that public figures cannot present a legal challenge against comedy or parody based off of emotional distress. Now, to be fair, Donald Trump, as of right now, is not whining about emotional distress, but his whining is demonstrating that he's definitely feeling some emotional distress. So I think it's the same sort of area.
I'm also, it's like a little frustrating, the whole like one-sided news coverage. I think today, in this space that we're in, if truth is the side that you're choosing, because unfortunately, the leader of our nation lies so much that then gives him, the opportunity to say, you're on the other side. You're working against me. If you call out something that's a blatant lie, then you're working for the Democrats, and that's not fair. And the point is that you lie a little.
A little, yeah, a little bit.
It's like,
so look, I'm sure that reasonable people watching this know that first of all, it's insane for a president to call for Michael Che to be locked up because of some jokes or whatever. Pete Davidson, send him to the slammer.
I know.
But I want to appeal to Trump supporters that might be watching this. So a couple things. So first of all,
have fun.
You have been saying for years, and because you've been told in your defense that collusion isn't a crime. So is it a crime or is it not a crime?
Yeah.
Because it appears it's not a crime if it's with Russia. It is a crime if it's with Colin Jost. So decide if it's a crime or not. I would say it would be a great thing. Look, second of all, is Donald Trump a guy who is a tough, thick-skinned fighter, or does he have such thin skin that a couple of jokes on a show that he swears he doesn't watch are enough to cause him to start tweeting manically? One of those things perhaps is true. I don't think that both of them can exist at the same time.
But we know which one.
We know, especially because this is not the first time that he has attacked SNL. He tweeted earlier, this 2 years ago, watch Saturday Night Live hit job on me. Time to retire the boring and unfunny show. Alec Baldwin portrayal stinks. Media rigging election. So there, it wasn't that they were colluding. It's that jokes by Alec Baldwin are powerful enough that they will rig an election. Remember, something that's rigged it doesn't have the natural variability that you would expect in outcomes. It's rigged, it's gonna go one way. Now clearly it didn't, but he believes that jokes are so powerful that he had no chance because of Alec Baldwin. It's just pathetic. It's pathetic, and it's pathetic coming out of an incredibly powerful person who should be spending their time on better things. I don't think that he's actually going to do any sort of court case, but is it impossible that in some of his executive orders he could do something hypothetically that would influence First Amendment rights, affect the corporate parent company of NBC or whatever? I don't know. He's crazy enough that at this point, especially if he's feeling targeted, if he's feeling like he could go under, God only knows what he would do.
And one could say if he really thought it was rigging the election, that in a far off make-believe land, maybe that person would, if a person thought this sketch comedy show was rigging the election, that possibly, their routine is to have their lawyers set up an illegal company in order to pay off, whoever can stop this show from going forward. I'm not saying that's what our president does. I'm just saying that, that's what some people do when they're worried about something rigging an election.
And if they did that, not a crime, not a crime.
The jokes are the crime.
And by the way, now really quickly, enough attacking Trump. I want to attack SNL. Not for what they did on this last episode, which was pretty funny, I thought.
And superstar studded too.
Exactly. It's what they did in 2015 when they allowed Donald Trump to host SNL the year before an election. I am assuming they did that not because they thought he's a comedic genius, because clearly he's not, but it's to buy goodwill, either with Donald Trump or with his viewers. And that is the sort of BS that MSNBC does and CNN does by bringing on Trump supporters. They think that if we're way fairer to them than they ever will be to us, that we will show them that we're worthy of their attention and time. And maybe they won't attack us in the future. Well, how has that strategy worked out? How has it worked out for CNN and MSNBC? How has it helped out for SNL? Has he stopped attacking you because you allowed him to host the show?
That's not what it is. No.
You don't think that that's why they brought him on?
Simply,
it's to get goodwill?
This is going to bring attention to us. That's it. That's the only reason that like certain shows continue to have people just lie, just over and over. That's the same reason that the Emmys brought out Sean Spicer after he called basically everyone in the audience stupid on a daily basis. Like, you know what I mean? That is the reason. That's why, Jimmy Fallon rubbed Donald Trump's hair while he was, being xenophobic and racist. Like, so that's why, because they hope that it'll bring them attention. The problem is often it backfires and people get mad at you.
Yeah.
But the reason is just like, oh, this is good. This is gonna bring them viewers.
Well, and the issue is, if it brings attention to you, maybe, okay, fine. It also brings attention to them.
It's true.
So think about the knock-on effects of what you're doing. Rudy Giuliani was also crazy. Unfortunately, I don't think we're gonna have time to get to him just yet. Maybe we can do it a little bit tomorrow. His legal defense of Donald Trump, I use air quotes because I don't know that it's actually helping them, has become even more insane than in past weeks. And yet he keeps getting deployed to the news. So whatever it is that he's doing, Donald Trump seems to think that it's helping. Now with that said, we are gonna take a break. When we come back, Jane Coaston of Vox is gonna be joining us. She has been doing research on YouTube's gigantic conspiracy theory problem, which we'll be talking about after this. I can only speak for myself, but it, for me, is becoming harder and harder on YouTube to avoid coming across conspiracy theory videos, regardless of what I actually watch. And as they become more common, they also appear to be becoming crazier. And joining the show now to help break down some research in this area, Jane Coaston of Vox. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Very glad to have you back on. So you did a recent write-up of your experience researching some of the rise of conspiracy theory videos on YouTube. Can you describe what you found?
So I think that it's interesting because it also plays into how YouTube itself works. And so what I did is I used a website called Algo Transparency, which has also been written up in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And basically what they do is figure out what the most recommended videos will be for any given topic, not the first result you're going to get. So for example, if you type into YouTube Donald Trump, the first results you will get are from authoritative sources. So it'll be a CNN, NBC, New York Times, something like that. But then when you click on that video, you know how you've got the up next? That's where the recommendations come in. And that's based on an algorithm that YouTube is using. And apparently, I spoke to someone from YouTube and they've tried to change it so it's more about what people want to watch and less about how long they've been watching. But that's where conspiracy theory material tends to come in. And when about 70% of the views coming on YouTube any given day are coming from recommendations, that means that millions of people are watching millions of hours worth of these YouTube recommendations. And so, for example, using Algo Transparency, I looked up Donald Trump and I looked up Hillary Clinton. And for both of those, using Algo Transparency, what I saw were, at least one video that came from MSNBC for Trump, and then another that was about QAnon, which is a very large conspiracy theory that alleges that Donald Trump and Robert Mueller are working together to arrest pedophiles, including actor Tom Hanks. And then for Hillary Clinton, the results were all about that Hillary Clinton secretly has a seizure disorder and has killed tons of people. And it was interesting also because I actually, someone from YouTube reached out to me and we had a conversation, and then they were like, okay, let's try this just using YouTube, using it in incognito mode, which we both did. And the first results for Hillary Clinton were something from Russia Today. And we clicked on that. And one of the recommendations for the Russia Today video, if you'd watch that, was a QAnon video. And so this is a challenge for YouTube because on the one hand, YouTube does really well when people watch videos a lot. And I think everyone does this. For example, while I write, I like to listen to music on YouTube. And so if I'm listening to classical music, up next will just be like, oh, you'd like to keep listening to more classical music. But the issue is, and I think that something that YouTube's been working on, but there's a great write-up in the New York Times that I linked to in my piece. YouTube has, it's not even an extremism problem, but I would call it an extreme problem. And here's what I mean by that. YouTube, if you start watching a video about basically any subject, eventually you will get to the most extreme version of that subject. And New York Times write-up, they basically made the point, like if you look up jogging, eventually you'll get to ultra running. If you look up vegetarianism, eventually you'll get to raw veganism. If you look up, Bernie Sanders, if you give it enough time with how the algorithm has worked, previously and still somewhat today, you will get to 9/11 truther videos. And if you look up Trump, eventually you get kind of into weirdo right-wing conspiracy theory YouTube. And so basically it just keeps heightening at each point. And there's actually a terrific piece in the Daily Beast today called How YouTube Built a Radicalization Machine for the Far Right. I recommend everyone check it out. It's a great piece. But it talks to some former extremists who say that they got started on their path towards right-wing extremism by watching YouTube videos. It started out with kind of men's rights movement videos, or kind of different videos coming from people who are actually pretty established conservative thinkers. But then the recommendations on those videos then just start getting more and more extreme. And even how SEO, search engine optimization, works for YouTube as well, because YouTube is a Google product and you're playing into trying getting good results on Google. Is a lot of those videos will have like X destroys Y or something like that, and so that extremism just builds up. And at a certain point, you find yourself deep in the weeds of like neo-Nazi YouTube. And I think that, it's challenging because on the one hand, YouTube had this issue, when Google CEO went before Congress last week, he raised the point of, we're trying to balance being a platform for free speech, but also, trying to make it safe for people. And as anyone who's ever attempted to be online or be in public knows that that's almost impossible to do. And so, but it's not just, it's not that a problem that these videos are on there. You can, if you want to post a racist video, that's your right to do so. Or in my view, should be your right to do so. But at the same time, how the algorithm works and how these videos get recommended to people, videos that allege that Hillary Clinton wants to murder children and has eaten the faces of children, that should not be something people are getting recommended to them by an algorithm that's supposed to be giving them content that they might, that is useful to them.
So I just want to briefly, as you brought this up, I was very curious about this. So I'm familiar with QAnon and Pizzagate and the seizure stuff, but you weren't just randomly joking about this. Is actually a theory that you were bringing up.
Oh, it's an actual. No, it's problematic because at the same time, I want to talk to you about this, but on the other hand, I'm just like, I don't want this to go any further because it is the weirdest conspiracy theory ever. And basically, so there's been a lot of really great writing about how accusing people of being pedophiles is kind of in 2018 and probably for the remaining future. It's kind of like, that's the most evil thing anyone can think of someone doing. So it's become kind of the go-to accusation. That's a critical part of Pizzagate is accusing, John Podesta and all these figures of being pedophiles, accusing Hillary Clinton of being a pedophile. QAnon is at its base about arresting pedophiles. And so, there is a specific conspiracy theory that holds that on, Anthony Weiner's computer, Anthony Weiner, who, kind of disgraced former congressperson and New York official, he had a file. This never happened, to be clear. He had a file on his computer that contained footage of Huma Abedin, his then wife, and Hillary Clinton ripping the face off a child while she's still alive and then putting the face on themselves as a part of a satanic ritual sacrifice. And I'm aware that these words are ridiculous to say. This is not a thing. This is not true. There was no video. There is no truth to any of this. And yet on YouTube, there are, I looked recently because I was wondering, because, this actually came up. The reason why I referenced this specific conspiracy theory is that it came up during the Google CEO's congressional testimony last week. And he mentioned something like, oh, this is something we're working on. And if you look on YouTube right now, there are hundreds and hundreds of videos, each with thousands of views, as I wrote, dedicated to a conspiracy theory alleging that a former presidential candidate ripped a child's face off and wore it as a mask.
Jesus, our country. Yeah, that really is, I think, the theory to top all theories. It makes QAnoners look like, they're just enthusiasts at that point. Unfortunately, we are at a time, I mean, I could talk about this with you all day, and hopefully you can come back on, because I have some follow-up questions about some of the political ramifications of this.
I think my last point would just be that this is almost, as we saw from Congress, this isn't an issue that Congress or YouTube or Google really has any beginning of a solution for. We saw during the congressional hearings that Representative Steve King thought that Google ran Apple. And so, but at the same time also, if we've learned anything over the last couple of years, any sort of effort to regulate the internet always comes back on, people on the left or sex workers or people whose free speech is frequently under duress. And so I think that, this is a problem to which there aren't that many good solutions.
Yeah, and certainly something that we're gonna have to grapple with if we can really do anything at all. And it's not really clear exactly what we can do. Jane, thank you so much for coming on. Great work there on the Fox. Hopefully we can talk again soon.
Sounds great, have a good one.
You too. We're gonna take a short break. When we come back, the latest phase of Donald Trump's war on the working class after this. It is insane to me that after all of this time, there's still a significant chunk of the country that thinks that Donald Trump is in office to protect their interests and advocate for them, when he has done nothing but the opposite this entire time. And I want to talk about this through the lens of his trade war. We've been talking about the trade war with China and other countries for some time, about the number of jobs that they'll kill, the economic output that they'll stop. People still think that he's doing that to help them. Well, there's a new analysis of what will happen to the American economy and to your income if Donald Trump follows through on some of his stated threats when it comes to tariffs and the different aspects of this trade war. And here are a few components of it. First, a decrease in GDP, don't worry about the percentage, the equivalent of $94.4 billion will be lost. That could pay for any number of different programs that we're told are too expensive. Almost 300,000 full-time American jobs will be lost. And more importantly for you perhaps, for if you're in the middle quintile, we love talking about quintiles here, of income earners, you could lose $453 every single year, not as a result of all of his economic policies, but as a result of the trade war tariff threats specifically. And to put that in context, that $453, which again will vary, it could be more, it could be less. You've probably seen articles like this recently. Let's bring up this headline. 40% of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency expense. Now, perhaps it's somewhat different if it's occurring, every week as opposed to all at once, but that is how dire the average American family's economic situation is. And lurking under the surface in a way that it's difficult for you to even know, you are being attacked in a way that you cannot actually sustain, and being led along the way to believe that that attack is actually in your best interests. That you could be on the verge, the precipice of economic collapse, while you are cheering on the man that's pushed you to that point.
I mean, this is not surprising. We've known this, and then he's pitching stuff and saying stuff that's not making sense. And we've seen it in many industries. You saw what happened with Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
We're seeing what's happening with, now we're talking like the auto industry, and it's the same thing over and over and over again. And not even with just with money, like we were talking about climate stuff. I saw a piece in the Washington Post about someone being upset about land. Near the border, they voted for him. Thought he was just kidding about the wall. He was saying something.
Really?
Now they're talking about taking land, or we're talking eminent domain issues in Texas. And this guy is like, wait a minute, this is an issue. I voted for you. I didn't believe it. But I mean,
I thought you were just,
right.
like,
I thought you were just joking, or I thought, you're saying something that doesn't make sense, but I believe that's just politics. You're going to work it out for me, and then over and over and over again in all different areas, it's not being worked out for you.
Yeah, and it's difficult for a lot of people to recognize it. I'm so glad that you brought up the example of Harley Davidson, because both with Harley Davidson and with GM, like, he is going out of his way to the extent that he can as an individual, as president, damage their business, threatening them. We're gonna drive you out of this country. Like, those are American jobs that are being lost. And he has convinced his followers that it's awesome that they're being lost. And in fact, you should hate that company. You should not buy their products. They should lose more jobs. Like, can you imagine a Republican president encouraging the destruction of Harley Davidson? But that's the point we've actually gotten to.
But the thing is,
we're really out of time, unfortunately. There's so much good stuff coming out of you. But thank you so much for joining us. Always good to have you on. You're gonna be doing Wednesday as well.
I'm so excited.
Review. And look forward to that and more throughout the week. We'll see you then. Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.